So noted.
You're with the paper or the Lebanon?
Yes.
And he's Lebanon Daily News, and Laura is the radio over here.
Okay. Laura, I have another one, but I don't want to give it up yet.
Okay, that's fine.
You know, because I use it for talking points.
Thank you.
I have 3 points to make at the outset. Number one, I believe the issue here is not what any of us personally want for Governor Dick, rather what Clarence Schock wanted. And that was one of the big changes when we were appointed trustee, is that the prior trustee, Donegal, didn't care what Clarence Schock wanted. And I believe the answer is simple. I've been dealing with this and living with this and looking at this trust for 30, 40 years. And it's simply a playground and park in a forest setting. I really think it's that simple. There's nothing in the deed, nothing in his writings where he talks about conservation, habitat, ecological diversity, the kinds of things that were addressed here and that we have to address to keep a forest. But his focus was he wanted a playground or park in a forest. I also think that since Lebanon County has been involved, it really looks great. And I think Lebanon County has done a terrific job. And I don't think anybody needs to be embarrassed with what we've accomplished and done with this. Number two is if you are gonna, after you listen to us, listen to them, listen to other people, if you decide, gee, we don't want to be a trustee, we don't want this room full of people again, we don't want to have to put up with this, you know, we're tired of this, I would suggest then that you resign as trustee, which you can do by going down to the Prothonotari's office and filing a paper, and then let the court decide who they're going to appoint as a new trustee. And the reason I recommend that is that if you keep being the trustee, you're going to keep having these kinds of folks come back. It might be tomorrow, it might be 20 years from now, but you're going to continue to have, this is just something that it goes with the territory. And I personally think that the county should continue to do it, but you're the commissioners. Now, number three is this, and I think this is an important point. For the first 15 years that we were trustee, the only source of revenue was the county. And the Psycho Foundation would put in money, but there was no obligation to do that. And they just chipped in what they wanted to put in. In 2015, now remember, and I'll cover this in my history, but they were pretty hostile to Lebanon becoming a trustee. I mean, this wasn't like, oh gee, Donegal's resigned, would you guys like to do it? They were really, this was hostile. And I was involved in it, and it wasn't a nice process. But it worked out nicely, and we worked out a deal where you had 3 members of the board, they had 3 members of the board, and it was a shotgun marriage, but it worked great. Now, since 2015, when they left, they said, here's $1 million, we're going to put it in trust, Fulton Bank is the trustee, and that $1 million, you get the interest every year, which is around $30,000 a year, a little more. And at some point in the future, when it makes no sense to have this as a trust, we're going to give you the rest of the money. So we're going to give you that $1 million. Well, what's interesting, and I've just looked at the paperwork myself, is that beneficiary isn't you, the county. That beneficiary is the board, us, And it specifically says that if the board is not in existence, that money doesn't go to Governor Dick. That money goes back to Lancaster to fund scholarships, as we've done with the other 5 or 6 million that we had. So that money would be lost in terms of providing access, providing benefit. And I had nothing to do with that language. I'm sure you were given the choice that you get in college when you're in the child line, take it or leave it. And so you took it, and I think that was good. But you know, if changing this now is going to be very complex and risk. There's risks associated with it. Now, the history. Clarence bought this property in 1934, 1935. Before this was primarily Coleman land. The Colemans used it for timber to run the Cornwall furnace. In August 1936, and I gave you, you could follow this here. In August of 1936, he posted a thing on to the residents of Mount Gretna, and he said, "Gee, would you like to come up and look at my towers?" Now, the towers that were there were not what we have now, but they were wooden towers that he built, and he wanted people to come up to view Governor Dick. Well, what intrigued me as I looked at this is that he pretty much wanted people to come walking up there, but he had a road to service people that wanted to drive up to the top of the mountain. I mean, you know, this is how he was. He really wanted people to come in. So between 1936 and 1940, the rule was that if you wanted to cross Governor Dick, you needed to get permission from Clarence, and there was a form, and you had to send in papers, and blah, blah, blah. By 1940, the Horseshoe Trail, which goes across Governor Dick, no longer carried that requirement, so that he had lifted that requirement. And I believe one of the things that, you know, I've done a lot of research with Clarence, and one of the things I think he was very concerned with in the very beginning was liability. So he wanted people, before they came on his land, to sign a waiver so they wouldn't sue him, you know. And when you read that article that I gave you guys before, he talks about how he designed the tower with in mind that people can trip on stairs, but he's designed these towers so that, you know, it's more effective. So between then and 1954, Clarence built a house up there. It was a 6-story high tower. That was his private residence. And he dug wells that were public because he wanted people to come up to be able to fill their canteens. And that was the way he did business. In December 31, 1940, and this is interesting, Clarence was he was a married man, but he had no children. And he didn't have any, he had heirs, he had a lot of heirs, but he didn't have a son or a daughter. And in 1940, he took his entire business and put it in a trust and declared it a charity, and basically said, you know, they're going to give me just enough that I can live, but this is all going to be for a charity, and the primary purpose of this charity is to support education. And the background on Clarence is that he was born about the time that Henry Ford was born, right after the Civil War. And Clarence had an older brother who went to Annapolis and was a star. And Clarence wanted to go to college and be a star. And by the time he came along, the family business wasn't doing so well. And they said, you got to come work in the business. You can't go to college. So that's Clarence carried that. And so in 1940, when he's got millions of dollars and no money and no heir, he disinherits everybody, and he puts this money in a trust to take care of, so kids can get an education. And the interesting thing to me is not that only that he did it, but if you turn to page 6A and 6B, he did it in a very public way. I mean, on 6A and 6B are newspaper articles, front page articles. Clarence Schock converts business into trust fund for good of community. Or Clarence Schock disinherits his whole damn family to send kids to high school or college. By 1954, he still had not disposed of Governor Dick. He was holding Governor Dick. I don't think because he wanted to. Reading between the lines, I believe he was holding Governor Dick because he was trying to get somebody to take it and do what he wanted, and no one would take it. And in that article that I gave you, it's in this booklet, he talks about going to the state, and the state said, yeah, we'll take it, no conditions. We need a game land. And finally, he scrounged around, and he was from Mount Joy. I'm sure he was the leading citizen of Mount Joy. So I'm sure that when he went to the Mount Joy School District and said, would you take my piece of land and turn it into a park? They said, you betcha, Clarence. And that's what he did. And that's before the concrete tower was built, because he built that tower, Psycho built that tower after he conveyed the land. And the reason they built the tower is he was really sick and tired of the vandalism. And if you read that article, it starts on page 10. It's called The Idea As I See It. He goes on and on and on about the vandals and the kids and the, you know, what kind of people they are. And he spends like one paragraph talking about what to happen to the property, which is a park or playground or park or any other lawful use, and he goes on and on about the juvenile justice system and the fact that they can't do anything. The thing that does intrigue me is nowhere in this article, which was published September 2, 1954, can one find the word Lebanon. He talks about Lancaster County and Lancaster, you know, and I don't think he was aware that, you know, that where he was. And it's clear that he does not talk about habitat, conservation, ecology anywhere. He talks about a forest. So on page 18, I have an article here from July 8th, 1966. Commissioners concerned over unwarranted use of area around Governor Dick. And this talks about, it quotes Bob Lesher saying, you know, it would be a terrible thing if this area turned down. People were going on there with Jeeps and all kinds of stuff. Among those people was me. I took a Jeep load of my buddies in a 1946 Jeep I had, and we went up Governor Dick, and didn't seem to occur to us that maybe we shouldn't be doing that. By 1962, excuse me, 1982, Donegal, which is now the trustee, sells trees to finance school projects. You know, and they hire a professional forester, and the professional forester is there to make sure that they can, you know, capitalize on this. Nowhere have I ever come across an article that talks about Governor Dick having a plan, the school district having a plan for Governor Dick. Meanwhile, in 1970, Lebanon County buys a 106-acre farm in North Cornwall Township for recreation. And I'm sure you folks remember that. I remember that.
Arnold and
You
Crowder.
remember that very well.
Yeah.
And we owned that and held it for till 2002 when we got Governor Dick. And there's an editorial in here where the newspaper gave us a pat in the head. It's on page, it's actually page 29A. Talks about the fact that the farm wasn't used and it was sold again, and it gave a pat in the head to the commissioners for not taking the 700 acres that they had and converting it to recreation. In 1996, by then I had gotten involved a little bit. I was in the legislature, and my neighbor came to me and was angry because he was a contributor to a trust of some kind that would contribute money that they could use to buy game lands. And Kevin had gotten a solicitation for money to buy game land, and the deal that had been cut was that the trusteeship of Governor Dick would be sold for $1 million, and that the Game Commission would buy it, and they would take whatever they were allowed to pay under the law, they would pay, and the trust would put up the difference. I have an article in here that references it in page 24. There's the National Conservation Fund, and the fund said last week that the organization's interest evaporated when it was discovered that the trustee deed outlining restrictions for bids hunting. When Kevin told me that, I looked up the deed again, and I saw that, and I quietly let the Game Commission know that maybe this wasn't the best plan. We also passed legislation to put jurisdiction of this trust in Lebanon County, and to require the trustee to annually delineate their expenses and income, their income and expenses.
And I would like to, one of the things I did was gathered some of my documents. You have been providing, and I didn't even know I still had these, 2017, 2018, and 2020 are the ones I came across. You have been providing detailed documents with finances and minutes and things for a long time. This is not new.
So in November of 1997, Donegal decides they're getting out of the Governor Dick business. And I had a nice friendly conversation with their superintendent, who loved my legislation. And they announced, they file a petition to appoint the Psycho Foundation. And the Psycho Foundation is going to take over. I came to the commissioners, and the commissioners basically said they would be willing to take on Governor Dick. So after some back and forth that you have some clips on, Governor Dick ended up being 50% them and 50% us. And that's the way it stayed until 2015. I have one clip here from the it's on page 29. It's September of '99. The headline is "Tower at Governor Dick Park closed to clean up vandalism." They had to close the tower for a month in order to clean the place up after they took over. And there's additional clips. There's some clips from the Friends who are here. I don't know if they know their history, but they objected strongly to the construction of the current building and to what was being done.
The nature and meeting quarters.
Center.
The environmental center.
Yeah, the environmental center.
And Ray and Tom were witnesses, and it was apparently a little mean. And but the bottom line is that their goal was, as they set forth, to keep Governor Dick wild, so there would be no development. They opposed development, and they wanted to keep it wild, which is fine. What I've observed in looking at article after article of criticism after criticism is the person who takes on the role of the critic always takes on the role of being the one who can decide what's best for Governor Dick. So that if it's habitat for butterflies, then that's what it ought to be. They never say, oh, well, gee, Clarence said playground or park. And he's the boss. And you know, this wasn't known as the Clarence Schock Memorial Park in 1999. This only became the Clarence Schock Memorial Park after we got involved and after we said, you know, maybe this guy ought to get some credit here, you know. So we're here. It's been a long battle, but when I say that I'd like to see the county continue. I'd like to see the county continue as a board. The board needs to continue in order to receive the benefit of that trust fund. But that's what I think Clarence would have wanted. I really think that, and I think he'd walk up and stand there in front of that tower and look at the two poles that house the lights and the cameras and say, good job, guys. And say, hey, Frank Ryan, thank you.
And I wish we had that in 1940, he'd probably say.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. Yeah. So, and then I conclude the book. There seems to be a lot of ambiguity about who Governor Dick was. And a lot of people seem to think that he kind of was a lot of things that he wasn't. But I have an ad here from July 22, 1796. It's on the last page. And at that point, Governor Dick was a felon because he had escaped from the Colemans as a slave. And this is as much of a bio as you get on and he had worked there from like probably 1770. When he originally went there, he was carried on the books and on the their slave documents over in Lancaster as Dick, and he during the Revolutionary War, I think, was a key factor in the success of that, and I think that Curtis Grubb appreciated him, and that's why he gave him the title Governor Dick. That idea of giving a title of respect to a slave came from New England. Wasn't obviously a Southern thing, and I think that that's why he became Governor Dick and was carried on the company books apparently as Governor Dick. So we have a lot of history here, a lot of tradition. I think the real tradition is that what Clarence wanted was a playground and park in a forest setting.
Tom, do you anyone add? After all that,
I started my career in a one-room schoolhouse. And my teacher said, if you don't have anything additional or meaningful to add to a discussion, shut up. So I'm done.
the thing I want to wrap up with is, and if Doug talked on it a bit, and so did Chip, and that's money. Essentially, the only assured funding the park has is what we get from the commissioners, which is, even that is not necessarily insured. You can decide you don't have the funds to fund us, and what we get out of the financial trust. The commissioners have been very generous to us in areas aside from your general fund. We talked about taking the fence down on the Pinch Road salvage cut. That was erected with growing greener money from the state, but that money was allocated to each county, and the county commissioners got to select what projects were to be funded in their county. Lebanon County commissioners directed the funding to Governor Dick for salvage cut and for the fencing and seedlings, and we had a room full of people like this who didn't want to cut down the dead trees. And that's clear about it. These oak trees were dead. They were killed by the gypsy moth. And we were going to remove them, plant 15,000 seedlings, and fence it. And we had a room full of people like this, came to the commissioners, don't do it. You know, let them there, let them fall, they'll be covered, whatever. And all along, whenever the commissioners have an opportunity to direct funding to the park, you've done it. And I want to have to thank you for that. Made Marcellus gas funds. Every time we've ever applied for Marcellus gas funds, the commissioners have provided us with funding. There are some grants which require governmental application. For instance, the money we got for the boardwalk for the first phase came out of what I think of as rail trail money. It's Parks and Recreation money. But that needs to be a governmental entity to apply, so the county was the applicant there. Other funds need to be applied for by nonprofits. So in those cases, we can be the applicant. The money we get from USDA cannot go to a governmental entity. But USDA funds a lot of the things Doug talked about. They fund a good portion of the deer fencing. They fund part of the invasive species control, and they fund part of the tree planting. And we have an ongoing contract with USDA. We have a 5-year rolling contract. We just finished the 5th year. We have a budget in with them now to start the next 5 years. We'll probably get something this fall telling us how much money they're going to be able to fund us with. So the synergy there has been wonderful, where you have a nonprofit entity that can be the applicant, where grant funds can't go to a governmental entity, and yet you have a governmental entity involved as trustee that can seek funds that are targeted to governmental entities, or can point the money to the park when it comes through you. You funded the second half of our boardwalk with the Recovery Act money, which you had the control of. So I have to thank you for that and all the other things you do for us. I mean, all the insurance in the park is covered by the commissioners. Our payroll functions are covered by the controller's office. Our ranger is overseen by the sheriff's department. The EMA will be doing the monitoring of the camera system. So every now and then I have people say to him, well, you only get X dollars from the commissioners for the park. And I say, no, hey, you're not looking at the whole picture, folks. You have to look at really everything the commissioners do for Governor Dick to get the full view. And I'd really be failing if I didn't sit here today and thank you for that.
You're welcome. And it's a great partnership.